This is Deuteronomy chapter 24. Moses starts out here on the subject of divorce. Verse 1, When a man takes a wife and marries her, then it shall be, if she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some unseemly thing in her, then he shall write her a certificate of divorce and put it in her hand and send her out of his house. When she has departed out of his house, she may go and be another man's wife. Comment. Verse 1, by law, a man may divorce his wife by giving her a written certificate of divorce. We shouldn't pass over this verse without going to Mark chapter 10, where there's a 10-verse section on divorce. Some Pharisees asked Jesus if it was okay for a man to divorce his wife. Jesus said, "What did Moses command you?" And the Pharisees answered, "Moses allowed a certificate of divorce to be written to divorce her." Jesus said to them, "For your hardness of heart he wrote you this commandment. But from the beginning of creation God made them male and female. For this cause a man will leave his father and mother and will join to his wife, and the two will become one flesh, so that they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let no man separate." End quote. A lot of people can't measure up to what Jesus said about divorce there in Mark chapter 10. And in the last chapter, Deuteronomy 23, we read some things to which no one can measure up. The fact of Romans 3:23 applies to everyone. Quote, "All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." End quote. No one measures up. The law nails everyone on some point or other. So what will become of us? We have to remember the woman caught in adultery in John chapter 8. No one in the crowd picked up a stone to condemn her, and Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go your way. From now on, sin no more." Now coming up in the case of a divorced woman who's remarried, verse 3, if the latter husband hates her and write her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house, or if the latter husband die who took her to be his wife, her former husband who sent her away may not take her again to be his wife. After that she is defiled, for that is an abomination before Yahweh. You shall not cause the land to sin, which Yahweh your God gives you for an inheritance. Comment. By law, if the divorced woman remarries and loses her second husband, the first husband can't take her back. This is going to make her first husband more careful about divorcing her in the first place. Now we come to a section on miscellaneous laws, verse 5. When a man takes a new wife, he shall not go out in the army, neither shall he be assigned any business. He shall be free at home 1 year, and shall cheer his wife whom he has taken. Comment. From time to time in the United States, we've had public debate on military duty, who should be forced to serve and who should not. So it's interesting to consider Yahweh's law on the subject for ancient Israel. Yahweh expected every able male, 20 years old and up, to go to war, Numbers 1:3. He condemned those who wouldn't go to war to spend the rest of their lives in the desert, Numbers 14, verse 29. However, he exempted those who recently built a house, planted a vineyard, or engaged a woman for marriage, Deuteronomy chapter 20. He also exempted everyone who judged himself to be fearful, Deuteronomy 20, verse 8. And here in verse 5 that we just read, he's exempting any newlywed man for a period of 1 year from military or civic duty. Verse 6, "No man shall take the mill or upper millstone as a pledge, for he takes a life in pledge." Comment. This is describing a grain mill with an upper stone and a lower stone. The upper stone spins around and grinds the grain on the stationary lower stone. The miller makes his living with his mill. No one should take his millstone as a pledge, that is, as collateral for a loan. In other words, even if someone is indebted to us, we shouldn't take every last thing he has. Now, verse on kidnapping, verse 7. If a man is found stealing any of his brothers of the children of Israel, and he deals with him as a slave or sells him, then that thief shall die. So you shall remove the evil from among you. Comment. Death for stealing and enslaving or selling an Israelite. Verse 8. Be careful in the plague of leprosy that you observe diligently and do according to all that the priests, the Levites, teach you. As I commanded them, so you shall observe to do. Remember what Yahweh your God did to Miriam by the way as you came out of Egypt. Comment. Miriam was Moses' sister who had a brief case of leprosy, Numbers 12:10. Even she was subject to the quarantine rule, so Israel should be faithful to enforce all the laws about leprosy. Also, Israel should remember why God struck her. It was because Moses was Yahweh's chosen leader, but she insulted him and elevated herself as his equal. Numbers chapter 12, verse 10. When you lend your neighbor any kind of loan, you shall not go into his house to get his pledge. You shall stand outside, and the man to whom you lend shall bring the pledge outside to you. If he is a poor man, you shall not sleep with his pledge. You shall surely restore to him the pledge when the sun goes down, that he may sleep in his garment and bless you. It shall be righteousness to you before Yahweh your God. Comment: a pledge refers to something promised as collateral for a debt. Verse 10, do not take the collateral by force. Verse 13, if the debtor is poor, you shall not keep his collateral if he needs it. Verse 14, you shall not oppress a hired servant who is poor and needy, whether he is one of your brothers or one of the foreigners who are in your land within your gates. In his day you shall give him his hire, neither shall the sun go down on it, for he is poor and sets his heart on it, lest he cry against you to Yahweh and it be sin to you. Comment: there's a difference between household servants and hired servants. A household servant was attached to his master. The master provided him with whatever he needed. A hired servant worked for wages. If he's poor, pay him daily. He needs the money right away. Verse 16, the father shall not be put to death for the children, neither shall the children be put to death for the fathers. Every man shall be put to death for his own sin. Comment: the law calls for the death penalty for crimes including murder, attacking father or mother, rebellion against father or mother, cursing father or mother, kidnapping, failure to contain a bull with a history of goring so that he kills someone, working on the Sabbath, offering children in the fire to Molech, idolatry, wizardry, false prophecy, adultery, incest, homosexual acts, bestiality, prostitution by a woman living in her father's house, blasphemy, coming near the holy things of the tabernacle, and false witness in a capital case. No one shall be put to death for the sin of another. Moses focuses on treatment of the poor in the next 6 verses. Verse 17, you shall not deprive the foreigner or the fatherless of justice, nor take a widow's clothing in pledge. But you shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and Yahweh your God redeemed you there. Therefore I command you to do this thing. When you reap your harvest in your field, and have forgotten a sheaf in the field, you shall not go again to get it. It shall be for the foreigner, for the fatherless, and for the widow, that Yahweh your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. When you beat your olive tree, you shall not go over the boughs again. It shall be for the foreigner, for the fatherless, and for the widow. When you harvest your vineyard, you shall not glean it after yourselves. It shall be for the foreigner, for the fatherless, and for the widow. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Therefore I command you to do this thing. Comment: let's review some of the law regarding treatment of the poor. Leviticus 19:9 and Deuteronomy 24:19. Don't reap the corners of your field, or go back over the field to gather the gleanings or forgotten sheaves. Leave them for the poor. Leviticus 19:10 and Deuteronomy 24:21. After harvesting the grapes, don't go back over the vineyard for the gleanings, and don't pick up the fallen grapes. Leave them for the poor. Deuteronomy 24:20. Beat your olive branches only one time. Leave the rest of the olives for the poor. Deuteronomy 26:12, every third year give your tithe to the local Levites, foreigners, fatherless, and widows. Deuteronomy 15:8, open your hand to your poor brother and do not harden your heart. Lend to him sufficient for his needs. Exodus 23:6, do not deny the poor man justice in lawsuits. The chapter we just read, don't collect your debts or your collateral by force. Leviticus 25:36, take no interest from the poor man or from any of your Israelite brothers. Leviticus 25:48, redeem your poor relative from servitude. Deuteronomy 15:12, don't keep an Israelite servant against his will more than 7 years. Leviticus 25:28, return the poor man's ancestral property to him every 50 years. That's a partial list. And what's the penalty for violation of these laws? Moses didn't prescribe any penalty for individuals, but he did prescribe national penalties for ignoring his law, Leviticus 26, verses 14 through 39. And he knows how to keep individual account. Proverbs 19:17, quote, "He who has pity on the poor lends to Yahweh. He will reward him," end quote. If we lend to Yahweh, we can be sure he remembers and he'll pay it back. That's the chapter. Deuteronomy 25 is next at landofhavilah.net. Deuteronomy 25.